joining us.
Mic check. Yes.
Yeah.
Here we are.
All is good. Thanks for joining us. My name is Bob West. I'm with West Strategy Group. And what we're going to talk about today is the relationship in between how Olympians perform and translating that into the business environment. So Shannon, you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah. Sort of the bigger context of the presentation you'll be seeing. I do a lot of work kind of across industries, working on leadership, performance optimization, and this presentation, Medalist Mindset, is one that I've done often, but have the privilege of doing it today with my business partner, Bob West. We thought that we had this really wonderful opportunity with this room full of cybersecurity leaders and experts to kind of drive home the importance of applying these kind of performance tools and the mindset to whatever you do. And Bob will be able to provide us with some of his real-world examples as well along the way. But the backstory for me, briefly, my background is in track and field. So I spent about 15 years as a professional track and field athlete. 1,500 meters is my event. I was in 3 Olympics, set world and American records, and have some bronze medals to my name.
Excellent. I have no bronze medals to my name, but I visualize them. So I read a book on security last week, and I think I can talk about it. No, I started working in security in '95. I've had 3.5 CISO roles. I did an interim gig a couple of years ago. I've consulted with Deloitte, E&Y on my own. I've also had a couple of product roles. Most recently, I was on Palo Alto Networks' Prisma Cloud leadership team. I think at the end of the day, one of the things that we want to do is make sure that you understand the correlation in between them. Just to give you some background and translate into common person context. So Shannon's best 1,500 meters is 3:56, which is the equivalent of a 4:13 mile. 14:38 for 5,000 meters, which is about 4:40 per mile. And one of the things that's really interesting beyond that is the longevity in Shannon's career. So the average professional track and field athlete has a career length of about 4.5 years. Shannon, as she was telling you, ran professionally for 15. And for 10 years, she was ranked in the top 10 in the world. So you think of when you compare, there's a very, very small number of people that have had the opportunity to achieve that. So we're going to talk about goals to start out with.
Yeah, well, the slide you saw before, if anyone has heard of me, it's usually those things, the highlights. I think a lot of us in our lives, we're defined by the greatest hits, but what I think is so important is the backstory. And so really what we want to dive into today is that backstory. I sort of touched on this, but Bob West and I, we work together at West Strategy Group. We're kind of a boutique consulting firm where we're trying to help businesses and others maximize their performance. I think part of the way that we really try to focus on that is by looking, as I'm going to talk about today, looking at this backstory, understanding what it takes to kind of create a strong foundation to be successful. And the first slide or I guess the following slide that you've seen is the first of 5 keys that when I think about a medalist mindset and this idea of how you take kind of sports performance and apply it to any business or life goal, first it's really being clear about the goal that you want to do, which sometimes can be really challenging if the things that you're trying to do are trailblazing or haven't been done before. In my own experience, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, never wanting to be an athlete, which is crazy to say now, at this kind of deep into this athletic career and this life that's been defined by sport. But if you go back to the 80s and 90s, the role models that I had in sports were basketball, football, and baseball, and they were these heroes. They were incredible, but they were all boys, and as a little girl, that wasn't something I thought I could be. And so I sort of put that out of my mind as a goal, but I really instead tried to focus on what what drove me, where my strengths were. I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I knew I wanted to strive to be the best in the world at something. I didn't know what that exactly was, but I knew kind of what my drivers were. And so for me in my journey, it was, girls aren't athletes, and then starting to realize, well, I do like competition. You see the middle photo is me as a little Irish dancer. The fun kind of story about that is I started with ballet, but gravitated towards Irish dancing, not only because it was kind of the community I grew up in San Francisco, but also because Irish dancing had a competitive component. And it was scary to stand on stage alone in front of 3 judges, kind of analyzing my every move, but I also liked the thrill of that need to perform, and I liked that feedback of whether I had done well or not that I could then take home to kind of try to improve on. Ultimately, as I continued to commit to what I was good at, and as I continued to develop those strengths, I came across running and discovered that kind of all of my traits led me toward a career path in sport, but it certainly wasn't clear cut. And I think it's fun for Bob to share his backstory as well, because he shared at the outset his deep experience within cybersecurity, but his path to this moment was also not a straightforward one.
Yeah, so I think back to college, I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I took the typical path from being a German major, which is what I studied, into technology, as most people do. Okay, maybe not. But this was back before electricity in the early 80s, and PCs were coming onto the market, and I figured, well, maybe I can do something there. And so I ended up getting a job with a small computer reseller, really smart people, and somewhere along the way they asked me to manage the network, and I said, of course I can do it. I had absolutely no clue what it was all about, but I learned, and then after that, got my first corporate role in technology. So I spent about 10 years in technology infrastructure, worked at Citi in New York and Chicago for the majority of that period. And fortuitously, I got a call from a recruiter to join E&Y in a cybersecurity consulting practice that was being spun up in early '95. And that was the start of it. It's interesting because going back to what you were saying, I would not have visualized that I would be where I am today back in the day. And one of the things that becomes important over time is really to understand, what is your goal, right? I mean, what is your Olympics? So thinking 3 years from now, 5 years from now, what is it that you want to achieve?
Yeah.
Foundations.
Yeah, so yes, what is it that you want to achieve, and thinking broadly, thinking big, and then trying to think about the path to get there, and that's some of what we're going to dig into as well. But the second key that we speak on is foundations, and really that, in my mind, no path is straightforward, and no path comes without setbacks. In my athlete journey, that setback in my career came, the biggest setback, I would say, or the most defining one, came at the end of my collegiate career. I had just won indoor nationals. I was a top recruit coming out of college. The shoe companies were already starting to reach out. And then my collegiate season was cut short with a stress fracture. And it was one in my hip. It was a pretty severe one, one that could have ended my running career forever. And I think that there's a really interesting business corollary when you think about a stress fracture, because if anyone is aware of them or has had one, stress fractures are the result of they're a chronic injury. They're the result of something being off day after day, week after week. And, it's something that maybe is uncomfortable at first, but eventually leads to a major injury if not dealt with. And I'm sure all of us have things, whether in our personal lives or our business lives, that are annoyances that ultimately come big disasters. One of the things I think that this meant, or I guess the reason that this became a turning point in my career, was not so much the moment in and of itself, not so much that injury, but the way that I dealt with it and the approach that I took to recovering from it. So, I think that so often when something goes wrong, our tendency is to try to rush back as quickly as possible. I'm not a patient person. I try to be, but I'm not, and I want to be there yesterday. That being said, with this injury, the timing of it was such that there was nothing I could do. My season was just done. I couldn't rush back for anything. And so instead, it gave me this opportunity to really pause and understand what even caused the injury in the first place. I use the term prehab. That's a really common sports term. It's essentially root cause analysis. So for me, what caused that stress fracture in the first place, and what could I do to give myself a better chance of success in the future? Now, mind you, this was 2007. 2008 was the Olympic trials, and I had it in my brain that I wanted to try to make my first Olympic team. And I had that in my brain as I'm walking around in crutches, and pretty much everyone had written me off. And with a stress fracture in my hip, I came to discover that it was a leg length difference that caused it. So I couldn't change my body. My body was what it was, but I could try to figure out ways to work with it rather than fight it, to work with it. And so part of my prehab was understanding that leg length difference and getting an orthotic, so mechanically changing my leg length difference. But then also part of it was understanding, okay, if I need to make sure that my hips and core are stronger. So what are the exercises, what are the things that I can do to try to create muscular strength? And what is the daily action that I can take to reinforce those movement patterns so that I have less of a chance of getting injured again? And then within it more broadly, okay, what are the treatments that I can do? So finding a good chiropractor, a massage therapist, having a coach that understood, I had a certain mileage range that was appropriate. All of these are very specific sports examples, but they also correlate within a business context, within a life context, where it's, some things are mechanics, some are behavior, some are the team that we build around ourselves. But before we build any of those things, before we change any of those things, it's really important that we do pause and really think about that problem, what caused it, and how we can get to the root of it so that we can solve it with that prehab.
Yeah, and if you think in the cybersecurity world, we're always dealing with issues, right? Everyone experiences security issues, whether they're breaches or otherwise. And the question then becomes, how prepared are you for it, right? Do you have an incident response plan in place? Have you practiced it? What does my infrastructure look like? Are the right people engaged? One of the things that I help our clients with is really understanding that whole life cycle. And one of the things, for example, that's typically overlooked is getting corporate communications involved, because ultimately your external reputation is only as good as the message that you communicate. Because if you're not prepared to succinctly communicate, we have an issue, this is how we're going to deal with it, you can run into really significant issues. And so having that in place, and ultimately there's all these preventative things that you can do as well, that from a technology infrastructure management, from patch management, to making sure that everything is running properly, that you have standard images across the board, because preaching to the choir, I'm sure when you get to large enterprises, protecting information and having everything orchestrated properly becomes that much more of a challenge. So as Shannon was telling you, she was a year out from the Olympic trials when she got injured, and no one thought she was going to make the team. Got a quick video here of her first Olympic trials.
First up today will be the women's 1,500-meter final, and that's Shannon Rowbury, the best 1,500-meter runner in the United States, the former Irish step dancer as a youth, who was an All-American at Duke, where she majored in filmmaking, and she's the favorite here today. Fifth. Jordan Hassay continues to trail the pack.
Well, this is shaping up to be a kicker's race, as you see Trenaire Clement second from the last with the glasses on in the back of the pack. That's not where Clement is supposed to be. Her coach, J.J. Clark, there she is. So said that she needs to be up front toward the top of this race, and right now, she is not in the mix.
Shannon Rowbury now has the lead. Kristen Worth-Thomas into second. Erin Donahue comes up into third. Here's the final lap about to unfold. And Shannon Rowbury starting to sprint clear of the field. Kristen Worth-Thomas is second. Erin Donahue is third.
Through the round, Shannon Rowbury showed that she'd be the class of the field. And believe it or not, a year ago, she had a stress fracture in her left hip. Her entire season was washed out, and now she stands less than 300 meters away from an Olympic berth.
Rowbury leads, Worth Thomas second, Donahue third, Sarah Hall is fourth. And now here comes Usini into fourth place. But Shannon Rowbury all by herself in the final turn. Donahue closing in on Worth Thomas for the second spot. Home straightaway looms, and Shannon Rowbury has the big lead. Kristen Worth Thomas and Aaron Donahue fighting for second and third, and Donahue edges ahead. Here's Rowbury in front, Donahue second, and Worth Thomas third. They hit the line. Shannon Rowbury wins. Aaron Donahue second. Kristen Worth Thomas is third. All three have the A standard. That's your U.S. Olympic team.
Thank you. So that was, you saw 2 slides ago me in this contraption. It's called an Ultra G, if anyone's ever heard of it, and it reduces your body weight. So a year out from that Olympic trials, I couldn't even run on the ground, as I shared. And you know, if we just go back 1 slide real quick to that third key, this idea of mind, this idea of controlling the controllables. And so, you know, when I brought you back to that injury that I had, and really that idea of, okay, I am 1 year out from this Olympic trials. I believe that I have a chance to make the team. What are the things that I can do in this moment that will give me the highest likelihood of success? I certainly didn't think that success was guaranteed. And if I'm being frank, I didn't expect that I would win, let alone win by that much when I was a year out, but I had set very clearly in my mind that it was possible, and I was willing to do the work day in and day out in order to give myself a shot. And so I think, you know, these first 3 keys that we've been talking about of, you know, goals, foundation, mind are very much internal, but it's so important to take that time, whether it's in your own life or whether it's in your business or any goal that you set for yourself, anything that you're trying to achieve, to begin with that internal alignment around what you want to do, clarity around what you need to do, and sort of the willingness to show up day in and day out to try to achieve it.
Yeah, and going back into the corporate world, so I joined Bank One in 1997. It's a JP Morgan Chase predecessor bank, and a few months into my journey, my bosses were projected of character and came up to me and said, hey, we think you'd be a solid member of the leadership team. And so we put together a 3-year development plan. I've never run at Shannon's level, but I ran in high school and college, and I still compete in my age group. And before I race, as most runners do, I visualize what's going to happen, right? So for example, if I'm running a 5,000 meter race, you know, here's my time at the mile, or 1,600 meters, I'm feeling good, here's who's around me, here's the environment. And so after we put together my 3-year development plan, and my plan was to be 2 levels up from where I was at that point, I would visualize being in my boss's office 2 or 3 times a week. You know, what did it look like? What did it feel like? Who was he speaking with? You know, what was the tone of the meeting? So ultimately, 3 years later, I did achieve that level. And the combination of the development plan as well as going through mentally what I needed to do, I was very comfortable, and I had a really good idea of what I had to do on a day-to-day basis. And so, you know, if you can visualize what your goal is, right, and it just really speaks to the power of mentally going through and understanding what your destination is, right?
Yeah, and because nobody wants to get up in the morning to do all the things, you know, but if you're clear on why you're doing it, then that, you know, when it comes to that tipping point of, do I hit the snooze or do I get up and, you know, do the thing I've said I need to do, it becomes more worthwhile. There's more of a reason, more of a, you feel more motivated to do so.
Yeah, for sure. Routine.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, those first 3 keys are really more internally focused, but the 4th and 5th keys are kind of now shifting to this external kind of how you show up in the world, because whatever goal we create, ultimately we need to bring it out into the world in order to try to achieve it. And, routine, I think, is such an important, boring but essential aspect of goal achievement. We all have the same 24 hours in a day, and ultimately the ones who achieve more, a large part of that comes from the way that they use those 24 hours to their advantage. Kind of a story from my own life, even kind of mid-career, because these daily audits, as I call them, which is essentially taking your ideal day and lining it up with your realistic day, and sort of seeing are there opportunities to reclaim time, to become more efficient. And these daily audits can be done at any point. And so for me, I remember at one point in the middle of my running career, feeling like I was always short on time, kind of driving here, driving there to do the things that I needed to do to get my job done, but feeling like that travel all over the place was actually detracting from my kind of larger performance. And so in doing a daily audit, I was able to kind of reclaim about 3 hours a week that were being spent driving to meetings that could maybe be better stacked or move to a different location. And as simple as little as 3 hours a week might seem, when you add it up over the course of the year, it becomes 6.5 days. And so I think, the encouragement for all of you whose lives are busy. You're here, you've got families at home, you've got jobs you have to comply with. We all are trying to squeeze in as much as we can, but I do think it's important to take stock, with some sort of regular basis, or at least if we're starting to feel harried, to take stock of our day and to make sure that we're running it, it's not running us.
Yeah, and you think of in our world, right? There's so many pressures that we have. There's so many distractions. There's a lot of things to be done. There's all the threats that we have to deal with. And so really understanding, how can I use my time most efficiently? Who do I need to spend time with? Is there something that I can delegate? And I think that's one of the big things that I've learned over time.
Well, and you're one of the most, as your business partner, your efficiency, your ability to accomplish so much each day is actually very impressive. And so, I think if you're willing, what are some of the actions that you take or the behavioral traits that you have that help you to kind of maximize your day to kind of have the strongest routine you can have?
Yeah, I do 2 things. First of all, at the start of the week, I'll go through my routine for the week. And actually, sometimes I'm in the middle of a pretty heavy travel period right now. So I'm looking at up to about mid-November right now. How does everything piece together? What can I squeeze in the middle, right? In a typical week, I'll look at, so what's coming up? Is there anything that I need to do to prepare myself for the week? And then every morning I'll look at what's on my calendar, because then mentally I know, well, here's something that needs to be done. I need to prep for this particular meeting or otherwise. And because otherwise, given how crazy our lives are, things just tend to fall apart.
I had heard the recommendation once that I've adopted in my own life of before bed, and I have a small little notebook that is sort of each day I'll write out before bed what it is that I want to try to accomplish the following day. And I used to do that on little kind of tearaway notes. It's actually been kind of surprisingly helpful having it all in one little notebook, because then I can also reference back. I tend to overcommit, so I can tend to reference back, what did I accomplish, what did I not, what do I still have pending, and it's a really good way for me at least to set that intent, either the night before or the morning of really what you're wanting to get accomplished that day.
Yeah, the final component of the medalist mindset is having the team around you.
Yeah, so my sport was an individual sport. No one could stand on the starting line for me. But in order to get to that starting line healthy, both mentally and physically, I needed to build a very robust team around me. And as an athlete, that included a coach, an assistant coach, a sports psychologist, massage therapist, chiropractor, acupuncturist, and an agent, more things even, but a big team that was around me that helped me be successful. I think once again, this is an individual sport, track and field. However, I do think that idea of, the team you build isn't so that you can mail it in. The team you build is something that should enable you to be more efficient, to be greater than the sum of all of its parts. Some of that also includes, as we go through life's phases, understanding that some relationships that were important in the past are not necessarily relevant for now. Maybe there's conversations that we need to have to update our goals and to update what it is that we're trying to do and ensure that the people around us are also really clear on those goals as well, because in order to achieve those big, hairy, audacious goals, it's going to take sacrifices and a lifestyle that not everybody might be on board with. But if you have that core team around you, in my own life, having that core team around me enabled me to kind of reach for even larger goals, because I knew that if I fell, that they would be there to catch me. And Bob, you've, on the flip side, built teams at large organizations, and I think it's really valuable for you to be share kind of your thought process when it comes to team building.
Yeah, so when I step into a role, one of the first things the first thing that I do is look at the team. Are they in the right positions? Are they qualified to do what they are supposed to do? What does the team chemistry look like? Are these people good fits? And back to your point in terms of doing audits, there's several times where either people aren't in the right positions, they've been in their role for a given period of time, they show up to work, but may not necessarily be the right person for that team. And when I hire new people, it's a really similar thing. I boil it down to, do I like the person? Because ultimately, you're effectively marrying the person, and they're part of your family, right? So do I like them? Are they smart? Can they learn? Do they have the capacity and desire to learn? Are they a good fit for the team? And ultimately, I always go around and have other people talk to them, because we want to make sure that this person that's joining the team is going to fit in, is going to contribute. And the final thing is that we don't want them to detract from the success of the team.
Yeah. So these are the overviews of the 5 medalist mindset keys that we've talked about today. We actually have a workshop on Thursday for those of you who are here if you're wanting to dig in deeper to some of these concepts yourselves. But we wanted to put them here also at the end as a placeholder so that you could hopefully pull whatever might be relevant and helpful in your own life. The way we set it up is that it goes from beginning to end. At the same time, any one learning lesson can be taken and applied whenever there's the need, whenever there's the value. And so goals, foundation, mind, those internal ones, routine and team, more external. And really, I do believe that success is a mindset. It takes a lot of work. You can't just think, I want to be great, and it's going to happen by snapping your fingers. But that intent and that kind of presence and the way we show up in the world is a very important thing, and the clarity of what we're trying to do will help bring others on board.
Yeah, and I think the final thing I want to communicate is, I think back at when I got my start in my cybersecurity career, I think one of the things that I would want myself to understand is that, everything doesn't rest on my shoulders, right? It's good and it's fine, and in fact, it's preferable to ask for some help, right? I have not achieved what I've been able to do just because, I have my stick-to-itiveness. But going back to my bank one days, and I've had several mentors and sponsors over time, they were the ones that facilitated my success, right? It was up to me to execute and do my job. But there's always people around you that you can turn to, whether it's your bosses, whether it's your peers, whether it's someone on your team, or a colleague outside of the organization. And I think that would be one of the things that I would leave you with, is that life is a team sport, and we're here to help each other out.
Yeah.
So I think we have a little time for some questions.
There should be a roving mic coming around, so if you have a question, we love questions. Please ask them, and I guess raise your hand if you want the mic. Or just shout. We can do that too.
Anyone? Pre-caffeine state.
Yeah, I feel that.
So Shannon, while we're waiting for some questions, if if there's something that you reflect on in your career, what is the most important lesson learned that you had during your 15-year track and field career?
I think for me, if I reflect on my career as a whole, what I'm most proud of is not that race that I showed you or not one item on the timeline. It's the kind of collection of accomplishments, the consistency that I was able to deliver on the highest level. I think for me that shows that I was able to figure out how to be resilient, how to have a strong team. I certainly had my moments and my setbacks, but I think I would think for a lot of you the goal is to build a legacy, and for me it certainly was. I want to be able to walk away and feel like not just on the track itself, but in the way that I carried myself in the world and the kind of impact I left on that larger running community.
Yeah, we've got a question right there. Let me just talk one more for about 30 seconds. So, similarly in cybersecurity, you've got to show up every day. You've got to be prepared to protect your environments that you're responsible for.
Yeah.
And so really just having the right mindset, right, to show up and really understand, we're wrestling with the bad actors, right, whether internal or external. And really being prepared for the day. You have a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, you guys did such a great job pulling it all together and making it all relatable. I think that's the main reason why there's not too many questions.
Oh, why, thanks.
Yeah. So we fooled at least one person into thinking that we know what we're talking about and relating it back to.
She begs to differ. Okay, here comes the question.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
You talked a lot. Can everybody hear me?
Well, we'll repeat it.
We can, yeah.
You talked about when things go wrong, which is great. Things do. That's life.
Yeah.
But what about when things go well and you start to coast? How do you break out of that and wake yourself up to go to the next shortest time?
Yeah. So the question, and point me in the right direction if I didn't hear correctly, but there's always times where things go wrong and you have to adjust. And there's certain periods in life where things go well. And I remember this one period for about 4 years where, irrespective of whether I did something stupid, everything continued to go well. And I think your question is, so what do you do as you're performing well? How can you make sure that you understand what it is that's good and how can you continue down that path? It was somewhere in that neighborhood, right? Yeah, how do you challenge yourself? How do you keep yourself motivated?
Yeah. I love that question because it's something that I've always done well at being I don't know if I'd even say underdog, but I've always liked being a small fish in a big pond because it's an opportunity for me to have a goal, to strive for it. And in my life as an athlete, I always wanted to be the best at the level I was at, but then what happens when you're the best at the highest level? I think there's different ways. I'll use the athlete's idea and we'll try to take the kind of corollaries outside of it, but even if I were to, for example, come home with a bronze medal, I could be trying to get gold, I could try to have broken a record or run faster. So there's always ways, I think, even within the role we have to continue to improve a little. I also think that there's opportunity when you hit that highest level to think outside of the box that you're in. So start to think, okay, so I've hit this level of achievement that I'm really proud of. How can I challenge myself outside of it? So for me, as a professional athlete, I had my first child in 2018, and the professional sporting world was not designed for motherhood. 2019, there was a lot of news around specifically Nike, which is my shoe company, but the way that kind of athletes and maternity were treated. Prior to that coverage in 2019, I had in 2018 worked with USA Track and Field, which is our national governing body, to create the first ever NGB policy to ensure that our athletes had maternity coverage during pregnancy and postpartum. And that was nothing to do with my athletic performance, but I had lived enough in a space to start to understand the areas where it could be improved. And it wasn't necessarily about fighting people, but it was about bringing people together around an important cause. And so I would say if you feel like you've really maxed out what your potential is, or where you don't have the same like drive to continue to kind of improve by hairs in that one space, maybe look a little bit on the periphery. It doesn't have to be broad or far afield, but like kind of what's right around you that you could maybe make better. And for me, at least, that's been a really valuable challenge as I kind of continue in this same space for all of these years.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things that when I look at you, it's not just that track and field is the sole focus of what you've done in your career, right? There's other things that you've done, such as creating your Imagining More Foundation. You know, and you know, that's one of the commonalities that we have, right? Is, you know, I'm on the board of directors of the USA Track and Field Foundation, and ultimately, you know, that's one of the things that, you know, collectively we're doing to make the world a better place. And the same kind of thing applies into the corporate world, right? As you have your day job, but how can you help your team? How can you help your colleagues to perform better and ultimately just have a better life, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the people who should be fixing things are the ones that are in it, because they really understand all the things that are great and all the ways that it could, you can move the needle.
Yeah.
Anyone else? I see a white flag up in the back. I love it. Right. Right. Yeah. Right. So I remember it was probably the third year of my pro career. I described 2007 where I was injured and it was just full steam ahead, everything I needed to do for running to be better. And then I made my first team in 2008 and it seemed like, okay, well that works, so I'll keep doing it. And by 2009, I could start to just feel myself, I could start to feel like the cracks. I could start to tell that I was losing control of my ability to deliver when I wanted to, because I was starting to just run out of gas. And it wasn't just the physical fatigue, it was also that mental restriction. You know, you can't live, I've discovered at least, I wasn't capable of living that intensity year round. And also because I wanted to build a strong community around me. And so anyway, the way that I thought about my running career at that point was, how do I look at my year as a whole and understand where I can build in some recovery periods and, you know, where I just need to understand it's going to be full steam ahead. As an athlete for track and field, it was around May through September, and I knew that that would be the intense period. I needed to be really focused on my diet, my sleep, my training. The fall, once that summer season was over, was my recovery phase, and I could relax. I could go take the trip. I could go have the wine or the dessert. And from the fall up through the summer, then it was a steady build again. And so I guess I would encourage you to look at your life, especially if you've been doing this, whatever career you're doing for a while, or at least a year or two, to look at it and understand the seasonality in it and try to plan in some times for recovery and allowing yourself, when possible, to really kind of restore and regenerate. Because only if you think about the pendulum, you can't only ever go high, like it has to swing the other way in order to have that balance. And so I really just try to approach life as much as possible thinking about balance. I don't achieve it all the time. That's where the team comes in to help remind you of, you know, where you are. But that's the way that I've mentally tried to approach it.
Yeah, one of the things I remember, this is one of the best lessons learned I had during my period with Deloitte. I worked with Deloitte as a managing director in the cybersecurity consulting practice. We never checked email on the weekends, and you know, everyone's busy, right? And the thought behind it as a firm was, you know, you're busy during the week, and if you don't take care of your personal life, then everything else becomes much more difficult. So we were very, very focused in making sure that when we were at home, we were actually doing something crazy and paying attention to our family, taking care of everything that needed to be done before we hopped on a plane again on Sunday, Monday, and started all over again. I think we are at time. So at 10 o'clock, we're going to be having some questions. We have a Q&A period in Fiesta 3 and 4. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and that you enjoyed the rest of the conference. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.